Hello and welcome to Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospital's annual members meeting for the 2019-20 financial year. My name is Susie Brain England. I'm chair of the board at this trust. Given the current challenges we face, this is our first ever virtual annual members meeting, and we welcome all of you who are watching this from home via Facebook or via YouTube. Over the next hour or so, you'll hear about our achievements as an organisation from the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. We'll also reflect on the changes that we've had to make as a result of COVID-19. For the first item on the agenda today, can I ask governors and members to note the minutes of the previous annual members meeting, which was held on the 26th of September 2019. These can be viewed on our website, and our website address is www.dbth.nhs.uk. Moving to our next item, as chair, I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect on what was a triumph of a year for DBTH. As an organisation, we've consolidated the good progress that we made in the previous years. This means strides forward in terms of patient care and treatment, and patient experience, whilst further strengthening our links with our partners both locally and nationally. We've also had the opportunity to reflect upon our vision, on our values and our objectives, clearly laying out where we want to be, where we want to go, where we're heading to as an organisation, refreshing our 5-year strategy and updating our breakthrough objectives. In all, we believe this will help us plot the coordinates to get to our overall destination of becoming the safest trust in England, outstanding in all that we do. The crowning achievement of the year came in February 2020, when we were absolutely delighted to receive a CQC good rating following inspections which took place in September and October. The inspectors observed many examples of high quality care and improvement since their last visit. The Trust's cross-site urgent and emergency services received particular praise, having improved, and the inspectors were very complimentary about our staff. Simultaneous to the arrival of our inspection result, we received the best staff survey results we have ever recorded. Overall, responses were significantly improved from last year's survey, and notably there were significant improvements in several areas, and most pleasingly, we saw a huge increase in the number of colleagues who would recommend Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals as a place to work. Moving to our award-winning Sharing How We Care ethos to ensure that our patients remain at the heart of everything we do, we have implemented a number of improvements this year. Developments include, but are not limited to, the introduction of bespoke welcome boards at the entrances to all of our inpatient areas. The welcome boards are designed to give visitors an overview of things like who works there, what tests may be carried out, and what the discharge process is. The boards have been making a real difference in preparing patients and relatives, first for a hospital stay and ensuring that they are well informed and that they know what to expect. In addition, our patient safety team introduced a simple yet innovative system to ensure that our inpatients are keeping hydrated during their hospital stay and to aid their recovery. This was the introduction of traffic light water jugs in order to monitor the amount that individuals are drinking each day, as well as enabling our clinicians to see how much a patient has drunk at a glance. These are just two examples of improvements amongst a whole range of innovations as driven by our health professionals. But let's move on to our financial position. I'm pleased to say that we've made good progress once again. Thanks to our identified savings and continued drive towards improved efficiency and effectiveness, we were able to meet our control total, which was a break-even financial position. What that meant was that we qualified for bonus payments from NHS England and Improvement, which equated to £0.4 million, resulting in the second consecutive year-end surplus position, a wonderful achievement shared by all within the Trust. In addition to a successful year operationally, we've been busy hosting some very high-profile visits, including the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, the Chief Executive of the NHS, Sir Simon Stevens, and of course the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. The financial year was not yet complete when we had to change our focus quite dramatically. The end of the year was spent making extensive preparations to treat and care for COVID-19 patients, including physically moving services around our hospital sites and redeploying our workforce to alternative areas. Every member of DBTH has pulled together during this time, and it has been immensely inspiring to see our colleagues responding so well to such huge changes in the way that we work. We have done a truly outstanding job in such extraordinary times. The health and well-being of our colleagues remained a focus throughout all of this, ensuring that staff were trained. And in line with national guidance, we provided all with the necessary protective equipment to keep them safe. And again, everyone has done a truly remarkable job. For all of our achievements, however, it is with great sadness that we reflect upon the loss of two beloved colleagues, Dr. Atala and Kevin Smith. Both will forever be remembered for the impact they made on their colleagues and services and on our communities. Overall, as we reflect upon 2019-2020 and the preceding years, I believe it's clear that our development as an organisation has been substantial. This is a testament to the hard work and the dedication of the members of Team DBTH and speaks volumes for the talent, the care and the innovation we can count on amongst our colleagues. At this stage, I'd like to make sure that we thank our staff and governors, members, volunteers, partner organisations, commissioners, regulators, board colleagues, indeed everyone else who has worked with us over the past year and our local communities. Their positive support has been overwhelming and has contributed to what's been another successful as well as challenging year for the Trust. Now, moving on to our next item, this year we have welcomed new colleagues to our Board of Directors. The first of those colleagues is Mark Bailey, who's joined as a non-executive director. And now, via the magic of technology, I'll pass across to Mark, who will introduce himself, his role, his background, and his role at the Trust.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Bailey. Earlier this year in February, I joined the Trust as a non-executive director. It really is an honour and a privilege to have this opportunity to serve within the health service. My background is that I was born in Armthorpe, just down the road from the Royal Infirmary in Doncaster. I spent most of my years, my formative years in the area, before joining Rolls-Royce PLC as a graduate engineer. For over 30 years I worked in industry and latterly became the group director for Rolls-Royce, looking after the way it cared for its customers. It kept people safe in the air, on the land or in the sea, and how we introduced technologies to make that care ever present every day. It's with that background that I hope to help this Trust progress still further. I'm inspired by the care and professionalism of the teams. We've seen it in this recent climate, and I hope I can do my bit to support the team to advance their care, bring innovation in, but always keep the patient at the heart of everything they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm sure you will wish him the very best of luck during his tenure at DBTH. I would now like to introduce our new Medical Director, Dr. Tim Noble, who began in post on the 1st of April. And I think it's true to say he's a colleague who's had something of a baptism of fire in his first few months as our Chief Medic. I'll now pass you across to Dr. Noble, who will introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Dr. Timothy Noble, the Medical Director at the Trust, and as you can see I'm wearing a mask because of the COVID situation and the social distancing, and in a moment when the cameraman leaves the room I'll be able to take it off. So I'm Dr. Timothy Noble, I'm the Medical Director at the Trust, and I've been in post now for 6 months. Prior to that I was a consultant physician at the Trust for the past 14 years. I've been a doctor for over 30 years. I trained in London at St Bartholomew's Hospital Medical School. I then worked in the south of England and Australia before moving back to my native Yorkshire to do my respiratory medicine training. I've worked at Doncaster Hospital since 2006 and have always enjoyed working in this trust because of its forward-looking ethos. I've worked on all 4 of our sites, including Retford, Mexborough where we are today, Bassetlaw and Doncaster. I've held a number of senior positions in management as a clinical director and as a care group director, a deputy medical director, and now the medical director. I took up the role in March 2020. As you recall, that was the start of significant change with the COVID pandemic, which posed a whole set of new challenges for me and the teams to try and navigate. As the medical director, I'm responsible for clinical governance, which is a process in place to ensure that we offer high quality care to the patients that we serve. I'm also the responsible officer. That's a position appointed by the General Medical Council to ensure that we employ high-quality doctors able to deliver outstanding care. This is done through a process of annual appraisal and revalidation. The last 6 months has been difficult for the whole world in terms of the COVID pandemic, but I've been fortunate in being able to shape the way that Doncaster and Bassetlaw Trust has handled the situation for the patients that we serve. I'm pleased to be able to contribute positively to our vision of being the safest trust in England. I know we have some excellent staff in our organisation delivering really high quality care. We have great learning facilities and we have good processes for understanding how we can develop further and improve our services. So thank you for listening. Please stay safe and observe the rules of social distancing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Noble. And again, I wish him the very best of luck in his role as he leads our health professionals forward into what will undoubtedly be a challenging future. I'd now like to introduce our lead governor, Hazel Brand.
It is my pleasure as lead governor to report on governor's activities during 2019-20. We have 15 re-elected, newly elected or newly appointed governors this month, so welcome to you all and many thanks to the governors that left or whose term of office ended during 2019-20 and into 2020-21. I'd like to talk about developing the role of governor. The role of the governor isn't new. It is spelt out in legislation and in guidance by Monitor, the former regulator of NHS Foundation Trusts, now called NHS Improvement. The role is a voluntary one. It calls for no particular qualifications, skills or experience, but governors must have an interest in Team DBTH, able to act as a critical friend and represent their constituents. The primary role of a governor is twofold: holding non-executive directors, or NEDs as they are often called, to account, both individually and collectively, for the performance of the board, and representing the interests of members, patients and the public to the board. During the year, governors have held NEDs to account in a number of ways. At board meetings, we see how NEDs challenge the executives and gain assurance that executives are heading in the right direction. We ask questions about the business of the board. NEDs attend Council of Governor meetings and report on their areas of responsibility. Governors are observers on board committees chaired by NEDs. We will be at the same quality assessment events that I will refer to later and again see them in action. We share training events, and a new buddying role between NEDs and governors is developing. Earlier this year, the Trust commissioned an independent survey of governors' effectiveness, teasing out our views on aspects of the role and training needs. The results were shared with governors at a workshop in August and will help further develop governors' training and development. Of course, with coronavirus, one of the roles that it has been difficult for governors to achieve is representing the views of members of the public. Now I will explain how technology is helping us. New ways of working. Towards the end of the financial year, in March, it was clear that coronavirus was presenting a real risk to our local populations and to staff. Face-to-face governors' meetings ceased, and we have all got used to video conferencing for Council of Governors and board meetings and board subcommittees. This is fine for meetings, but it means that the important part of the governor's role, representing the interests of members, patients and the public, is more difficult. But with the help of technology, once again, we will be using it to join non-executive directors on ward and department quality assessment visits. So we will be able to hear firsthand about patient care. At the suggestion of non-executives, small groups of governors have been paired with NEDs who act in a buddying role. Again, this is done virtually, but is working well. During the year, it was agreed that training of governors needed improvement. A much more regular programme of training and development was drawn up, with delivery beginning in the new financial year, with the first session an update on coronavirus. Sessions were scheduled on topics including equality, diversity and inclusion, the outpatient pharmacy, then more recently, stroke care. These sessions are important in keeping governors up to date while it is not possible to visit the hospitals in person. Other ways of using technology to tide us over this difficult period are regular e-bulletins from the Chair and me to governors, online training sessions, an online governors forum, plans to set up a governors WhatsApp group, making greater use of the Trust's digital channels and using platforms such as Facebook, where the Trust regularly updates both staff, governors and the public. Governors won't be back on the hospital sites in the foreseeable future, but members can contact us through the Trust Board office if you have useful feedback for us. Remember that governors don't deal with complaints, but comments and observations are most welcome. So 2019-20 was a year of change. Support to governors through the Trust Board office has now been consolidated with Fiona's full-time permanent appointment to the company's secretary post and Katie and Roz in the Trust Board office. One of the key roles of governors is to be involved in appointing NEDs, and during the year, governors helped appoint Mark Bailey as a non-executive director. 2019 was certainly a year of change and challenge with a general election, Brexit and more. So it was good to know that one of our governors, Peter Abel, was elected by Foundation Trusts across the country to the Governor Advisory Committee of the trade body NHS Providers. Peter was first elected in 2018 and became chair that year, serving another year in 2019-20. This was a real accolade and gave us a seat at the top table with the ability to present governors' views at a national forum. One of the aims of NHS Providers is to influence government, so it's good to know that our voice, through NHS Providers, reaches right into the Department of Health and Social Care. And talk about challenge, 2019 saw a visit by the Care Quality Commission. A group of governors was interviewed as part of the well-led inspection in October, which followed the unannounced 3-day inspection of clinical areas in September. The inspection saw DBTH rated good. This was an improvement on the previous requires improvement rating and was a just reward for everyone's efforts to improve services. So the year ahead. Governors must make a difference, and I believe we can and do. This trust is all about caring for patients and improving the quality of that care, and governors have their part to play. I would like to acknowledge the contribution governors make. Thanks to those governors that stood down at the last election for their contributions over the years. So governors have a busy year ahead, albeit working in a slightly different way. And I hope that for all of us who care about our local hospital services, it will be a rewarding year. Thank you to those governors that have helped with this presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hazel. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of our governors. Like all colleagues at the Trust, they have had to adapt to new ways of working and communicating with us, and I want to thank them for their ongoing contributions and for their support. We're now moving on to our question and answer section, where we will respond to questions submitted to us by members of the public. And the first question's from Phyllis, and she asks, when will orthopaedic clinics start again? And I'll broaden this question slightly by asking when we can expect the Trust to return to normal capacity in all of our clinics. To answer this, I'll ask Rebecca Joyce, our Chief Operating Officer.
So in relation to orthopaedics, our orthopaedic team have been working hard over the last, through COVID and over the last few weeks, to see a lot of patients through telephone consultations and to make sure that patients who are waiting a long time for surgery are checked in with and kept safe. So every patient is being reviewed. In terms of when the more face-to-face clinics will commence and start building up, we have a plan to get that work going, and that will be kicking in this month, October and November. So over the next 3 months we'll see a growing amount of face-to-face outpatient activity and consultations for orthopaedics. In terms of the wider question about outpatient clinics more generally, over the last 3 months our services have been working really hard to bring back services, bring back outpatient capacity, and our aim is to bring back 100% of outpatient activity. We have got to do additional cleaning, and we've got to do additional cleaning between patients if we're seeing them face to face, and some procedures where they're aerosol generating take longer compared to pre-COVID. In some cases there are some services which can't bring back 100% of their activity, and some examples of that are services like ENT and ophthalmology. But for the majority of services in medicine, in paediatrics, in gynecology, we are now getting activity levels back to pretty much normal level. Where there are some exceptions, so for example head and neck, we're working with those services to work out what additional ways they could bring back additional activity, and we're setting out proposals and considering those as an executive team. Just over recent weeks we've had to confirm to NHS England the proportion of outpatient activity that we will be able to get back on stream, and we have plans to get over 70% of our outpatient activity back within by the end of September. But a very large proportion of outpatient activity is now taking place. What it is also important to say is that we are doing outpatients differently, so we are now seeing more patients on a virtual basis, so almost 50% of our patients are managed through either a telephone consultation or a video consultation, and that's really fantastic effort, which means great convenience for patients and a more a greener model by not bringing patients onto site. And clearly there's some services where that feels appropriate, or some certain pathways, but then there's other pathways where a patient really does need to be seen face to face. We have done a lot of work to make sure that our sites are all COVID safe, so we've established social distancing policies in our waiting rooms, we've reduced the numbers of patients that can wait, we've transferred some services to a drive-through basis like phlebotomy services and some cardiorespiratory tests. And again, that's really fantastic innovation from teams right across the organisation to start doing things differently to make sure we can work well and offer the best care to patients in this changed world we live in.
The second question's from John. He asks what preparations are in place to tackle a potential second wave of COVID-19 this winter. And to answer this, I'll ask David Purdue, our Director of Nursing, Midwifery and Allied Health Professionals.
In terms of preparing for a second COVID wave, we've always been prepared for this inevitability. So we have triggers in place, which means that we're looking constantly at the number of patients who are coming in with symptoms of COVID, who follow in our organisation a yellow pathway. And we've got triggers at certain points, so when the acute medical units, the assessment units become to a certain point, they'll trigger that half of that unit becomes COVID. And we have the same for the respiratory units and for intensive care. So we've got real trigger points in which we can look at. This means now that we have to change the way we do things in the organisation. We have also made the elective pathways much more secure. So actually, if we do have to go into a lockdown, that we can still continue to provide elective care for our patients. Now that can be inpatient care, so people can still come and have operations, and the changes we've made in terms of outpatients, that people can have either virtual or video consultations, and we see the people we need to see face to face, that we still continue to carry on and do that to serve the population.
The third questioner asks, given the strains of the past few months, how will the Trust cope financially, and will this impact on the potential plans for a new build hospital in Doncaster? Now, the financial angle on this will be answered by our Director of Finance, John Sargent, a little later in today's presentations. But for an update on a potential new hospital, I'll now turn to our Chief Executive, Richard Parker.
At the beginning of the pandemic, NHS England and NHS Improvement discussed with Trust the way in which the finances would be managed to allow Trust flexibility to be able to spend additional monies on items like PPE, but also on building capacity to be able to deal with the potential increased admissions requiring hospital care. At the end of each month, any expenditure that we had incurred, which was additional to the base budgets, has been adjusted by NHS Improvement on a monthly basis to bring the Trust to a break-even position. Moving forward through winter, it is likely that additional expenditure will be incurred as we increase elective activity and also diagnostic activity and cope with winter pressures. This situation doesn't really have an impact on the potential for a new hospital build for Doncaster, as the proposal we're developing is for significant capital investment, which is managed through an entirely separate process. We have undertaken considerable work during the last few months to produce a very strong case for a new hospital build for Doncaster, and we're very hopeful that in the next few weeks and months that hard work will allow us to take the programme to the next phase, which will be the development of a full business case. As I said, we're very hopeful that our work so far is being received very positively and that we are in a strong position to make good representation about the needs of the patients of Doncaster, and particularly the need to replace the ageing DRI site.
The fourth question's from Linda. She asks, what is the Trust's current position on cancer, and has the waiting list been affected by COVID-19? And are we seeing more deaths related to the illness because people are missing treatments? To answer this, I'll ask Rebecca Joyce, Chief Operating Officer.
Well, the good news is that the Trust continues to perform really well on cancer pathways, and due to the hard work and dedication of our cancer teams, we did hit all the cancer standards in June, which is great news. So 2-week wait referral, 31 days for treatment, and the 62-day standard as well. So that's really, really good news for our patients. We do know that through COVID, some patients' treatment was delayed safely, but as a result of that, we have got some patients that have been waiting longer for cancer treatments. And what we've ensured as a trust is that we've really focused on that handful of really long waiting patients, that some of whom have waited over 104 days. So over the last 2 months, we've really been focusing on bringing those numbers down, and we now have just 8 patients who've waited over 104 days for cancer treatment. And sometimes that is because they've chosen to wait, or there are some particular delays related to COVID. But that number has come right down, and we continue to bring that number down further. We'll then really be also focusing on the small numbers of patients that have waited over 62 days for treatment who haven't fallen within our 62-day standard, to bring those numbers right down as well. But thirdly, what I want to really emphasise is that through COVID, our cancer clinicians worked tirelessly really to ensure that any delays for treatment that were necessary were done safely, and all patients were reviewed very carefully by our clinicians. So that involved contacting patients, it involved looking at chemotherapy regimes, making decisions about where alternative regimes were safer in the current circumstances. And it also involved lots of real innovation around cancer to make sure we were still treating patients. So that really meant that we maintained our services through COVID as well as possible, And since then, we've been really restoring our cancer services in the way I've outlined. Also, as part of that restoration of cancer services, we've really embedded some of the innovation that we saw take place during cancer. So we are now doing many more consultations on a virtual basis. We've looked at different diagnostic modalities where that's appropriate for endoscopy. So, for example, we're moving to a CTC diagnostic, which can replace endoscopy and therefore mean we can treat our endoscopy patients quicker. The Trust has also invested in some of those diagnostic services. So we've agreed an endoscopy recovery plan. We've agreed wider diagnostic services recovery. And our cancer team continue to really constantly look at what they can do differently and to predict the flows coming in. The final thing I would say about cancer and COVID is that during COVID we saw a reduction in the number of 2-week wait referrals that the Trust received. And since then, over the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've seen our referrals get back to normal levels and beyond normal levels. So for all tumour groups, we're now seeing around 15% greater demand than prior to COVID. So our teams are working to ensure that we can really keep on top of those waits, get patients brought in and treated in a really timely way for cancer.
The fifth question is from somebody who didn't give their name, but they ask, how confident are we of a COVID-19 vaccination in the near future? And if we are confident, when will it be offered to staff? To answer this, I'll ask Medical Director Dr. Tim Noble.
Thank you, that's a very relevant question. I think we are confident that we'll get a COVID vaccine in the near future. As you'll be aware, there's much work going on around the world and much work going on in the UK to develop a vaccine. When we do have the vaccine available, and there are some key contenders for the NHS, there is already an established plan as to how this will be implemented. This is planned to be delivered through fixed sites such as sports grounds, mobile sites such as vehicles, and temporary sites such as polling stations. There will also be a plan to deliver to care homes specifically. There is then an ordered sequence of categories of people to be vaccinated, and the first group to be vaccinated will be secondary care health workers. So in answer to the question, yes, I am confident we'll get a vaccine, and the programme will include vaccinating NHS staff as a priority.
Our sixth and final question comes from a member of the local deaf community. They ask, in the light of the new ways of working in regards to virtual consultations, are there any plans for these sessions to be accompanied by an interpreter to help aid communication? And to answer this, I'll turn to David Perdue.
So in terms of virtual, we have two types of virtual appointments. We have telephone appointments. So in terms of interpreters for people with a different first language, we can have a 3-way conversation with a system called Big Word, which we use in the organisation, which is really quite easy then to have a kind of simultaneous translation continue throughout that process. Then in terms of our deaf community, and also where it's felt that a video conference is needed, then that helps in some ways with the deaf community, because we can hopefully, if they lip read, we can make that much more clear. Working with the company to look at whether they could put subtitles underneath that video conferencing. In terms if that was needed an interpreter, then we would use the same as we did with a face-to-face appointment, and we'd look to get an interpreter to be with the consultant whilst they conducted that video conference.
Thank you all for your questions, and we'll try and respond personally to all those questions we haven't managed to answer in this presentation. Moving on our agenda, I'd like to introduce our Chief Executive, Richard Parker, who will update you on our progress in 2019-2020, as well as detail some of our actions post-COVID-19.
Hello everyone, my name is Richard Parker and I'm Chief Executive of Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. And I'm going to present the 2019-2020 annual report. So welcome everyone to this unusual annual members meeting, which is being held virtually for the first time in the Trust's history as a consequence of the impact of COVID-19, which will feature during my presentation, both in terms of 2019 but also in terms of the winter of 2020. So I'd like to begin just by running through some of the context in which the Foundation Trust works, and particularly some of the key issues for the NHS in 2019-20. Clearly, as in previous years, demand has been a significant issue for the NHS, particularly as we went through the winter period and came into the end of the financial year in March, where the impacts of COVID began to be felt and activity dropped significantly. I think without that it would have been a record-breaking year again for attendances at the Trust to receive treatment from emergency care services, elective services, and also through some of the diagnostic pathways for issues like MRI and CT and ultrasound. As in previous years, the key constraints in terms of providing a lot of those services is the impact of workforce, and particularly some of the positions in respect of vacancies nationally, and particularly vacancies for nursing staff in some of the smaller specialties like paediatrics. We're also working in a context of significant change within the NHS with the introduction of the integrated care systems and with the development of place-based working across South Yorkshire, but particularly for us in Doncaster and in Worksop and Bassetlaw. We couldn't end the context section of the presentation without really touching on some of the issues from COVID-19, which, as I've already mentioned, began to be felt in March as the NHS nationally and locally began to prepare for what was thought to be a very, very challenging first phase of COVID, with initial presentations across the world indicating the need for a significant increase in inpatient bed capacity and potentially a significant increase in critical care facilities and high dependency care facilities. In terms of our local context, then workforce has been an issue in 1920, particularly workforce pressures in smaller specialties. These are areas where teams may be, a small handful of people, 6 to 12 members of staff, and if any one of those staff chooses to move or to retire or requires a maternity leave, then it can have a really big impact on services. But also in some of the larger specialties like medicine, where the need to recruit adequate and appropriate numbers of qualified nursing staff particularly continues to be a challenge. We locally have also got the significant challenge of the estate, and I'll talk later in terms of some of the opportunities and some of the things we've achieved about the impact of backlog maintenance, refurbishments, and also replacement of major pieces of equipment, electrical substations, fire safety work, and also replacements of major pieces of kit like CT, MRI scanners. Activity was a challenge, particularly in the early part of the year, and as I've said already, would have been a record-breaking year, I suspect, for emergency presentations and elective presentations, but for the impact of the significant reduction in attendances in March. But clearly, I think as services begin to grow through the winter period and into next year, some of those activity and delivery challenges will remain and will become significant pressures for ourselves, but also significant pressures nationally. We clearly have had an opportunity to change in a way that the NHS has never seen before. The modernisation agenda and the need to change quickly to respond to the new pressures has created innovation. We've seen a significant amount of innovation locally, and we've been able to modernise in a number of ways, and we'll talk about some of those key issues later. But clearly modernisation has meant people working very, very differently, in recent months working from home, virtual outpatient clinics, but the use of technology in particular has been a significant development and a real opportunity and a really fantastic development in a number of ways that I think we'll take advantage of for many, many years into the future. The next slide illustrates the number of patients we've treated as a Foundation Trust, and as I said, although we saw an overall decrease in year. I think that that's only a reflection of the final month of March, where particularly the elective services began to reduce significantly to prepare capacity for the emergency beds and intensive care beds that would be needed. However, even without that last month's reduction, the slides illustrating some significant numbers of patients treated in Doncaster, in Bassetlaw, in Mexborough, but also in our outpatient services in Retford. And I think it's a commendable effort in terms of those areas to continue to see the year-on-year growth with a slightly restricted position in terms of revenue resources available to respond to some of those challenges. In terms of the Trust, we set ourselves some clear objectives and values in the year. This slide illustrates our We Care values, which signify that the patients and the staff are at the heart of everything we do. We Care, I think, is at the heart of the services, the heart of the staff's perception of their responsibilities, and something that we continue to build upon. In this year, we continued our efforts around our quality improvement programme, particularly to try to make sure that staff understood the journey that the organisation was on, but particularly understood their contribution to that journey at every level of the organisation, building from board to ward and ward to board. We set ourselves a vision, refined the vision, but fundamentally it is to be the safest trust in England, outstanding in all we do. Now, there are often comments around that's a really, really challenging ambition, but without that challenge and without that clear sight on what we're trying to achieve, we felt it would stifle our ability to be aspirational in some of the things we were trying to achieve. The True North journey is the journey towards the objective, towards the vision, and it sets out in clear terms 4 clear objectives, simple objectives in terms of what we are trying to achieve collectively as a team, and what we're hoping to be able to show through data and through objectives and through performance that we're actually achieving year on year. So we want to provide outstanding care and improve our patients' experience. We want everybody to know their role within the organisation in achieving that vision and live that role. We want that to filter through to our staff and our learners, so that we are one of the top 10 institutions in the UK for providing medical nursing, professional training to a huge number of people. But we want to build on that foundation of the last few years of being able to achieve the financial targets that we've been set, so that we have resources in future years to invest in terms of improving patient care, improving the facilities and the equipment we provide for our staff, and improving the learning opportunities that are available to the new graduates, the new trainees that are coming through the system, and that we hope to employ in future years. Our breakthrough objectives are the definition of what we're going to achieve in year to make sure that we continue to take the next step on that journey, and we try to make them very, very straightforward so that everybody can see whether they've been achieved and also see how they contribute to that overall True North journey towards that vision of an outstanding, highly credible and safe trust. And in the last year, in 1920, the objectives that we set ourselves, we achieved, and we've built upon them in 2021. And this slide demonstrates that in visual form that you can see throughout the organisation and that all staff can relate to. The next slide just makes that a little bit clearer for people in terms of what actually we're going to achieve in 2021. But you'll see from this slide it's a reiteration, a refocusing on the next step towards that journey, and an aim to improve the quality of our services and improve, to be innovative, to use research and technology to be able to achieve that. Continues to strive towards improving staff survey results and satisfaction, and making sure through the appraisal system everybody knows their place in the organisation and how they can contribute to the vision. and continues to state that aims to improve the feedback year on year so that our staff recognise that working for us is a great thing and that they're prepared to say to others, please come think about working in Doncaster and Bassetlaw hospitals, because the opportunities are there for you and you can develop your career, but more importantly you can do that within an organisation that's striving to improve patient care, built on a foundation of solid financial control and management, so that we're able to invest in the patient's future care, but also in our staff's future development. We were really pleased, absolutely delighted mid-year that the efforts that the staff had put in the last few years were recognised by the CQC, and we were awarded the overall good rating for the care that we provide. This slide demonstrates the outcome of the CQC rating, but clearly says to us that actually we can still make some improvements in the safety of the care that we provide on all 4 of our sites. And our aim in the next period of development, and by the time the CQC come to reassess us, is to be at least green in all areas, so to be at least good and assessed as good in all areas, but ideally to have on this slide some areas that are assessed outstanding, so that that true north journey, that vision, is being achieved systematically. So the hope is that the next time we're assessed, we'll get an overall rating of good in every area, but as I said, demonstrate some areas that are achieving outstanding results. In terms of the highlights of 1920, individuals and teams and collectively departments, wards, but also the Trust has seen the usual recognition in terms of individual accolades, but we've maintained our efforts around initiatives like Sharing How We Care, which is a newsletter and booklet that's developed and presented that demonstrates how things can be improved in departments and in teams, and that's been underpinned by the quality improvement methodology. We have a dedicated quality improvement team that's using some research-based techniques to ensure that staff feel that they can change the way in which they work, they can innovate, and often a lot of that improvement is about simple things. It's not about a huge investment, but it's about changing simple things to make sure that the patient is at the heart of everything we do. We've got some really good examples in maternity services, in the emergency department, in orthopaedics, where staff have actually just looked at the service in a very different way and have used that to improve things. In maternity services, for instance, the move to electronic patient records released a significant amount of admin time that was reinvested in time to undertake complex bookings for ladies that were undertaking maternity care, and as a result of that, the waits for those complex pathways were reduced significantly without any additional financial resource, but in a way that meant that the staff on a day-to-day basis experienced less problems and less challenges, and as a result felt better in the working environment. That sort of thing is underpinning the quality improvement work and the transformation work we're doing. We clearly have used a lot of technology and digital transformation to be able to do that. We've had some major pieces of investment in areas like electronic patient records, but also on ward and department areas to help the nurses with things like observations and calculations of risk scores. Some of the technologies that we've introduced in those areas have released time back to patient care, but more fundamentally have helped the nurses to provide safer services because the systems are underpinning safer nursing care. In the last year, we've achieved some of our best ever staff survey results. We were recorded as one of the most improved organisations for the way in which the staff felt about working for us and about the care they were able to provide for patients. Clearly really pleased and proud of that, and want to continue that journey into the next few years so that our staff see us as an anchor organisation, an organisation that they want to continue to work for, but more importantly that they spread the word that working for us is a really positive thing. We also received some fantastic learner feedback, and that's why we're able to say with confidence that in terms of those two objectives, to improve staff survey results, learner feedback, we actually exceeded our expectations in 1920, and that's a sound footing to move on to 2021. We've also been able to make progress around the health inequalities agenda and the diversity and equality agenda, and this slide's illustrating some of the key achievements. We had a very, very successful national flu campaign last year, and at this point I would like to encourage everyone listening to the annual members meeting presentation to really think about the flu vaccination campaign this year, to get the vaccine themselves and to encourage their family and friends to get the flu vaccine this year, even if they've never had it before. It's absolutely crucial that we increase the staff numbers and the uptake, which were in the high 70s last year to 80-90% at least this year, and encourage our patient population and our population in general to do the same. The evidence is that people getting COVID and flu in a short time order, or actually in worst case scenario together, have significantly more problems, significantly more severity of illness, and clearly this winter we want everybody to be as safe as possible. So as I say, if you've never had it before, please think seriously about it this year, and please encourage everybody to have the vaccine wherever possible and when not contraindicated. We've made significant progress with some of the things we talked about last annual members meeting around did not attend appointments, and technology I think in future will help us with that. But that's really pleasing, because that means that as we try to restore services affected by COVID, then we're using all of the operating lists, all of the MRI sessions, all of the outpatient sessions as successfully as we can do. We want to continue that development into the future, so patients have those sorts of options which they can effect easily and quickly to get an appointment that suits them. The slide illustrates also some of the issues around health promotion, particularly smoking cessation, and as we all know from the information we received from COVID, that patients whose fitness levels are better, who are not overweight, who don't smoke, obviously stand significantly reduced chances of having any complications of COVID-19. And clearly this is preparation, this is work that we need to undertake, because the ageing population, the changes in demographics, the increase in demand on services is going to be managed and influenced by how fit and how healthy our population is. And as an acute foundation trust, this is a really important agenda for us, as it is for general practice, for health and social care, to make sure our workforce is as fit as it can be and as healthy as it can be, but also the patients that we serve are equally fit and healthy, so that when they do suffer any degree of ill health, the complications of that are lessened. The final bullet point illustrates the partnership working that's been required this year in ever increasing amounts, and also the partnership working that will be required in the future, particularly as we look to expand upon some of our key strategic aims, like the new emergency department at Bassett Law Hospital, and also the work that we're putting in to try to secure commitment to a new hospital for Doncaster. Without the support of the councils and our health and social care partners and the third sector, we wouldn't be able to achieve the results that we have, and we wouldn't be able to plan for the future with those new facilities. And I'd like to thank those people now for that effort, and obviously welcome that continued support into the next phase of the Foundation Trust development. This next slide illustrates some of the key areas of performance that we achieved in 1920. It's very difficult, because of the impacts of COVID in March, to say where we would have finished the year in terms of performance, but up until that point we'd achieved very well benchmarked results. We were performing very well in South Yorkshire and Bassett Law, and we were performing well comparably nationally, particularly around things like the 4-hour access target in ED. And it's been really pleasing that during the COVID response, the priorities that we gave to providing emergency care, urgent care, cancer care, have reflected in the performance in cancer standards, and the Trust continues to perform really well in delivering those cancer standards and in delivering the urgent and emergency care, even in those challenging circumstances. And we're now preparing to be able to continue to do that through the winter months as we restore some of the elective services and plan to deal with what we believe will be an increased demand through the winter months. we do have to recognise the huge efforts that went in March to prepare ourselves for the expected challenges from COVID-19, with a significant number of admissions expected into the general ward areas with respiratory problems, but also a significant increase in the number of patients suffering severe ill health who needed intensive care and high dependency care support. The way in which we changed the theatre recovery areas, we stepped down some of our elective theatre work to enable us to be able to use those facilities for intensive care patients, and in fact increased the intensive care capacity fourfold across the trust. We initially had under 30 intensive care high dependency beds, and we made plans to be able to increase that to 130. Thankfully, and because of the efforts of the public around ensuring that they followed the messages that the government had been giving around isolation, social distancing, face masks, getting tested at the appropriate times, we didn't see anywhere near the number of cases that we had planned for. But what we were was ready. We were ready in case those patients did present to the trust. But as I said, thankfully that was not the case. That preparation's continued, and we've tried throughout the pandemic to use public money wisely. We have invested in intensive care facilities for the winter period through what's called HSDU. That's now ready for winter. And so again, without the disruption to elective services, we will be able to manage the predicted numbers of COVID cases that could appear in a phase 2 of the pandemic. But as I said, we've done that in a way that we expect to be able to maintain a higher level of elective services and diagnostic services through the winter period than we were able to do in the first wave of COVID. And the second slide is illustrating some of the fundamental changes we had to make at very short notice because of things like oxygen supply and delivery. Oxygen to the tower block at DRA is provided on a pump system basis, and what we were able to establish very quickly was that if the level of oxygen being used increased, then the pressure within the system would drop, and we may not be able to maintain the pressure from the piped gas supply. So we had to move significant volumes of beds around, and this slide's illustrating that we moved the respiratory ward, which was on level 7, down the tower block, so that the patients who needed respiratory care, which was going to be COVID related patients, could be provided with high flow oxygen safely and securely on a lower level of the tower block. Huge amount of effort went into this from colleagues behind the scenes, estates colleagues and others, to make sure this was done as quickly and as effectively as we could manage. Our staff also went to huge lengths in terms of the care they provided in difficult circumstances. I'm sure we all appreciate, having worn face masks for the last few weeks and months, how challenging that is. Well, our staff had to wear face masks, visors, full PPE clothing in the COVID areas for 8 and 12-hour shifts through the summer months, and I don't think we can underestimate what that took out of them as individuals and collectively for them and their families. And a huge thank you goes to them from me, from the board of directors, and I'm sure from you, the audience, for the efforts that they went through during that difficult time, and obviously for their preparation for being able to reinstate some of that during the winter months. The next set of slides illustrates the way in which the organisation altered its services to yellow and blue areas. Blue areas indicating areas where we didn't think that there was much risk of patients being affected by the impact of COVID, or in fact having COVID-19, and yellow areas where there was a suspicion that the patient may have COVID symptoms or may have COVID-19. Didn't necessarily mean that they did, but meant that the staff and others needed to be aware to make sure that they had a due attention to things like PPE, visors, masks, social distancing, and we're focused on that 100% of the time. On slide 6 we can see a huge pallet that's being delivered to the trust, bigger than we've ever seen before, with things like PPE. We had PPE products delivered through the night because clearly the army and others were trying to make sure that the NHS was serviced, and behind the scenes staff such as estates, but also procurement staff and supplies staff had to be on standby and had to be available on a 24-hour basis to receive the stock as and when it was delivered. And a huge thank you goes to them for their efforts during this time, because without them we wouldn't have had the supplies in place that the staff needed to be able to care for our patients. We also received huge amount of support from the public. Our staff were very, very grateful for that support, for the weekly claps of support for the NHS, and it really was a positive for them to witness that support on a daily and a weekly basis. And I would at this time record my thanks to them and to our public for that during this period of time. And as I said, without the efforts of the staff and the public, I suspect that our admissions to hospital and the way in which we cared for the patients would have been much, much more challenging. We ended car parking charges and introduced free food for staff during the first phase of COVID to make sure that staff didn't have to worry about being able to leave wards, to be able to get drink and food, but also to make it as easy as possible for them when they were at work to ensure that they were well hydrated and had the appropriate amount of nutrition and food during the shifts. This is only recently stopped as Sodexo have returned to a more normal service offer in terms of hot meals and catering, but they retained this facility for the COVID wards until, as I said, a few weeks ago. We are really, really grateful for that, as was the staff, and without this effort, I think on a day-to-day basis it would have been much, much more difficult. The next and final part of the presentation really looks forward to 2021, and clearly you will have already witnessed and seen from the presentation that the impact of COVID at the end of the first phase was significant. We moved then to a period of restoring services that had actually been affected by response to COVID, and we now move into ensuring that the services that we restore, the elective and the diagnostic services, are robust through the winter period. And that we are not impacted in the same way as we deal with a potential wave 2 COVID pandemic, and the MRI, the routine surgery, is able to continue through the winter months. Winter is going to be challenging. I would again reiterate the need for the flu vaccine, but I do believe that we are well prepared to be able to do the level of emergency care that's needed, but also, as I've said, to maintain those elective services in a way that we weren't able to in the early part of the year. As always, we remain focused on the quality of the care that we provide and ensuring that we take the opportunity and the learning from COVID to improve the quality of the care that we provide. Our QI programme is really important to us. It's a huge and central plank of our ability to improve services moving forward, and will be a central plank of our work and our ambitions to have that new emergency department at Bassetlaw, and also that new build for the Doncaster Royal Infirmary. It's clear that affordability for the Doncaster Royal Infirmary build is going to be key to that, and the way in which we manage affordability is to ensure that we improve the quality of the services, reduce the costs, and become as efficient and as effective as we can be. Work this year will continue towards our vision and to the True North journey to week on week, month on month, year on year, improve iteratively towards that objective. I think we've made significant progress in 1920, and we hope to continue that into 2021. That improvement is built upon our people, it's built upon our staff, it's built upon the way in which they responded to COVID and the great individuals and teams and the great team DBTH that we have. The people plan was very timely in its production. It's a national document that sets out the ambition of the NHS to tackle issues of equality, diversity, to tackle issues of access, to be an anchor employer, to make sure that there is opportunity for local people, for school leavers to enter the great career that the NHS is, and we want to continue that through driving on that people ambition, to driving on training and development, to driving on a great place for learners, and to make sure we use that as a way in which we employ and we recruit the future workforce. The board has recently taken a decision to set up a people committee, and it will be the people committee's responsibility to assure the delivery of those breakthrough objectives this year. And all that sets out that hugely clearly held ambition to be an outstanding organisation, to be recognised by CQC and other regulators, professional bodies, for the standard of care we provide to our patients and the standard of education we provide to our learners, but also for being a great employer. And we want to continue that journey into 2021, building on some of the things that you will see in the annual report that were achieved in 1920, but particularly achieving all of the objectives that the Foundation Trust set out for itself. I hope that the information that I provided has been interesting to you. There clearly is much more detail in the annual report. I hope that we've been able to indicate to you our ambitions as an organisation, but particularly our drive towards improving patient care year on year, and to being the outstanding organisation that we believe our staff are capable of achieving for us. So thank you for your time in listening to the presentations, and at this point I'm going to hand over to John Sargent, Director of Finance, to take you through the annual accounts. Thank you everyone, keep safe.
Hello, my name's John Sargent and I'm the Director of Finance here at Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals Trust. It's my job today to take you through the annual accounts for the year just closed in March 20. First of all, I'd just like to say, as I always do at this point, that our auditors have been through our accounts and they've been able to give us an unqualified view on the accuracy of the accounts. Also, in line with previous years, our auditors have agreed with the Trust Board's assessment that it's a going concern and are happy that the accounts are produced on a going concern basis. And in positive news for this year, the auditors have been able to give an unqualified view on our value for money, so that means they have no issues with the way we're using and spending our resources, and that's the first time since the Trust's financial deficit that has been the case. That also follows on from a use of resources review as part of our CQC visit that also reported the Trust's use of resources as good, which is a fantastic outcome for the Trust and us all. In terms of our accounts for the year 1920, I'm pleased to say that following receipt of bonus monies called PSF, the Trust finished the year with a surplus of £1 million. It achieved this surplus on a turnover of £434 million, and we continue to see our expenditure on our staff, which of course is our most valuable asset, of circa £290 million a year. In other headlines from the accounts, we spent £17.6 million on capital infrastructure, and we finished the year with £31 million cash in the bank, which is a healthy cash balance and an improvement on the previous year. In terms of all of that capital expenditure, we invested heavily in the site in an attempt to improve facilities for our patients and staff. We invested in medical equipment to ensure that we could get the best possible outcomes for our patients and our staff. And we invested in information technology, and in particular in that area we started an investment in a bed management system which will support decision making by clinicians. Within that there was a significant investment in a new CT suite which has provided better facilities to support us as a hyperacute stroke unit, but also to give more resilience to our services through A&E as well, and our cancer services. At the back end of 1920 through early spring, obviously the COVID pandemic was starting to be an issue as we prepared ourselves to be COVID ready as much as we could at that time with our understanding of the disease. Just through March we spent over £1 million in being ready for COVID and dealing with those first few patients. We've continued to spend at a pace throughout the rest of the year, and to the end of August we've spent £10 million on being COVID secure and treating patients. £7 million of that expenditure in this current financial year has been on revenue items, so that's additional staff, PPE, equipment, and providing free meals to staff, which I know was a popular thing, but also essential to make sure that we could keep people safe, COVID safe. We expect that we'll continue to spend at that kind of rate for the rest of this financial year as well. And that means that this year's finances have had to be managed very differently, and I'll talk more about that later in the slides. We improved our cash balance by nearly £11 million during the course of the last financial year. As I said, finishing the year with £31 million in the bank. That was partially because we generated a surplus, which meant we had more cash than we spent. We also spent a lot of time working on our cash management processes within the trust to make sure we were paying people in a timely manner, but also collecting our income as quickly as possible when we needed to. We also received our bonus monies within year last year, which means we had payments that previously would have been coming in the first quarter of the next financial year landed in March, which helped bolster our balance, but means we started this year with a good basis to manage the COVID crisis as a cash-rich organisation. Within the accounts there is one new item for the Trust. During the course of last year, our contractor who provided outpatient pharmacy services through the Well Pharmacy at the Doncaster site gave notice. The Trust looked at different options for the provision of this service, and the board agreed that the best option for the Trust was effectively to bring that service in-house and to run it as an arm's length body in Doncaster Healthcare Services, which is a wholly owned subsidiary now of the Trust. This means that the staff that previously worked in the private sector TUPE'd across to our organisation and are now part of the NHS family. The handover was successful and the pharmacy has run since October under management by the Trust and reports into the Trust Board on a quarterly basis via our Finance and Performance Committee. The process has been good and the service has managed to stay open and support patients and staff throughout the COVID pandemic and will continue to do so. We're now looking for further business from other NHS partners providing outpatient and similar services through the organisation. As we look forward to 2021, there are a couple of things that I need to point out in terms of the accounts and then in terms of just the general financial position of the Trust. Firstly, as was mentioned in the press and announced by Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson, NHS trusts have had their historic debts written off. This means that where the Trust had temporary or short-term loans to cover previous cash shortages, that money has been provided and those loans are no longer needed, so we've been given equity funding to cover off those loans, which helps the Trust balance sheet. We have just received £71 million worth of cash, which means we have now converted all of our temporary and short-term loans that were generated when the Trust had financial difficulties in the past into equity capital, and that now puts us on a much firmer and stronger basis going forward and will support our work looking forward to a new hospital for Doncaster and Bassetlaw. Secondly, the trusts all trusts have worked in a new financial regime this year due to the COVID pandemic and are being paid on a block basis for the whole year. This means we do not get paid for the work that we do, but a set amount. This amount is then adjusted up or down depending upon what spends have been necessary. At the end of September, the Trust will be in a break-even position for the year. At this point, the regime is changing and details of that are just being announced, so there is some uncertainty about this figure. It is expected, though, that Trust will be able to break even at the end of the year, having dealt with all of the issues around COVID, all of the uncertainty, and the issues around PPE supply. So we are now looking forward to hopefully having a more normal and stable financial regime and process for the forthcoming financial year. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll now pass over to Susie.
Thank you, John, and thanks to all of our speakers for some very comprehensive updates. Please would the audience watching today note that our quality accounts will not be received during this meeting due to the circumstances surrounding us of COVID-19. They will be posted on the Trust website later in the year. I want to personally thank you all for tuning in to our very first virtual annual members meeting. This year we've all been asked to do things outside of the norm and adapt to this new normal we find ourselves within. We will have to live with this for a little longer, but I have been struck by the support we have received from our communities, as well as by the dedication shown by our colleagues. There will undoubtedly be more challenging times ahead, But for our part as a trust, we will continue to work tirelessly for our patients, offering the very best care and treatment, come what may. Let me thank you all for tuning in, and I'll speak with you soon.